Hi everyone. Today I wanted to talk to you about something that a lot of developers need to be able to do, and that's sending emails. So I was going to explore how we can use VBA to send emails, what techniques we have available to us, and I'm going to give some sample code and some demonstrations of each one, so you'll be able to implement them into your application. And I want to be specific here. This is not an Access-specific video. These are general VBA code samples, so they'll work equally well in Excel, Word, PowerPoint, whatever the case may be. So let's start off by looking at my website, which is the great source of information, and it should be a reference. I have an article here, and I know the title says MS Access, but that's a little misleading. It originally started off as an article for Access, but it's expanded beyond that now. But how to send an email. And I cover here at the very beginning the first four most common approaches, in my opinion. And the first one is using the do command SendObject. Now, this is an Access-specific command. Okay, that doesn't exist in Excel and Word. As the name says, it's to send an object. So you have the option, it's not required, but you have the option of including a database object in your email that you send. So we'll look at that, and then we'll get on to the general VBA approaches. So we're going to look at Outlook automation. Then I'm going to look at an alternative to Outlook, which is Thunderbird, so how we can automate Thunderbird. And lastly, I'm going to touch upon CDO Mail, which is another very common approach for sending mails. You'll also see below I have listed another series of other techniques. These are things I've come across in the past over the years, not necessarily something I use myself on my day-to-day business, but it's very valid. Some of these are extremely popular, things like SendMail, VBMappy, Outlook Redemption. These are all highly reputable add-ins and DLLs and things like that that you can use to bypass the security notification for Outlook, for instance. You'll also see, if we're talking about Access, FMS Inc. Has an add-in, the Total Access Emailer, that you can drop into a database and you can use it to automate sending emails, firing off reports, things like that. So if you're an Access person, the FMS add-in could be very interesting to you as well. So, like I said, I'm going to follow this in the order that is presented on my article currently. So, without further ado, let's look at the SendObject. So, let's take a look at SendObject. As I said, this is an Access-specific method. So, I'm going to start off, the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to come here and I'm going to just create an email demo database, so an empty database. And for our purposes today of being able to show examples of sending attachments and things like that, I'm going to put here a couple sample images, a text file that we're going to use as attachments. And let's get into it. So we open up our database. Like I said, it's a blank database, so there's nothing there. The first thing I want to do, I want to come here and I'm going to use the application parts to create a contact database, basically. Just that way we have content to work with. We have tables, we have forms, we have reports. Now we can get into sending an email using the SendObject method. Now there's two ways of doing this, and I'm going to start off by showing you how to do it with a macro, even though I personally do not encourage using macros. They're crippled versions of VBA, and personally, beyond using them for auto keys, auto exec, things like that, I don't recommend macros. They're harder to work with. They're harder to add error handling and things like that too. It doesn't make sense to use macros. Unless your hands are tied, which is an extremely rare thing, just stay away from macros. Go straight to VBA. You're going to thank me in the long run, I promise you. Nonetheless, we can use SendObject to send emails using a macro. Now, what we have to know here is, if we look here in the list of actions available to us, if you're in Access 2007, the action was called SendObject. But if you look here, there is no SendObject. Okay? As of Access 2010, for some reason they renamed it to Email Database Object. So you select that, and when we get into the VBA, you'll see you have this exact same input arguments. And you just come here and you choose what you're doing. So you have a choice. You can include an object, or you can choose not to and just send a plain text email. The choice is yours. Now, if you want to include, let's say, a report, we can come here, pick a report. Then we pick which report we want to send. And then we say which format. Okay, I want to send it as a PDF. And then here you say who you want to send it to. Someone at somewhere.com. You can add BCC, CC, a subject, subject line, wow. And what are you wanting the message to be? Hello world. And then you have a choice here, edit message. Do you want this message to pop up so the user can see it and interact with it, make changes, and then they choose to send it? Or do you want this to just automatically create the email and send it off without any user interaction? So if you put it to yes, it's going to pop up. And let's save this. Okay. Send email. And let's run it and see what happens. Now, I don't know if you noticed there was a brief pop-up that showed up. Now, what happened there is Access to create the PDF actually has to open the report and output it as a PDF. So that's why you're going to see a brief pop-up in Access, and then you get your email that was made. And if you look, it's written exactly the way we specified in our import arguments, our to, our subject line, our PDF, and our hello world message. I'm going to show you one thing here. For the to CCBCC, you can separate and add another person. Okay, well, you can add as many people as you'd like. Okay, and I'm separating with a colon in my case. We save it, we run it again, and you'll see that now you have 2 recipients. Okay, so that's how you can do multiple recipients. What are the weaknesses of the SendObject? Okay, before getting into the VBA. Well, if you look here, the pros and the cons. Like I say, it's built in, so you don't need any special functions, libraries, references, anything like that. The beauty is you can actually add in a database object, and you're using your default email client, which typically is Outlook. So this is going through Outlook. It's going to show up in your sent items. Now, where are its weaknesses, however, is it only does plain text emails. You cannot do HTML. So forget bold, underline, italic, images, tables, lists, all of that stuff. It's no. You can't include multiple objects. You can only include one. So it's one report at a time. If you have to send 10 reports, then it's going to be 10 emails. You can only include database objects. You cannot include documents on your file system on your computer or on a server. No, only database objects. So your reports, your forms, your tables, etc. It obviously requires for this to work that you have an email client installed. So if your computer doesn't have Outlook, doesn't have an email client for sending and receiving emails, well then Access can't interact and automate and create and send an email. And as I said, this is an Access specific method, so it only works in Access. It doesn't work in Excel, Word, etc. Okay, that being said, how would we do the exact same thing in VBA? No big deal. We'll go to Create, just a normal standard module to open up our VBA editor. And just for good practice, I'm going to insert my header. And then we can come here And we can create a sub. We'll call it test me. Okay. And we can make this testing. And we can look at how do we do this. Well, we're lucky. This command is a single line. So we just do command dot send object now. Okay. And it's the exact same input arguments. If you look here, we have object type, object name, output format, CC, BCC, subject, message, text, edit. It's the exact same input arguments that we saw in the macro. So let's start off with the case where we're going to do no attachment. So just we're sending a plain email. So here we're going to say no object. Okay. And then because we're doing no object, we don't have an object name to supply. So you just leave it blank. And we don't have an output format. So we leave that blank as well. And here in the you do the someone at somewhere.com. And you can do CC if you want. I'm not going to. I don't have any, so I leave it blank. I'm not doing BCC either, so I skip over that, leave it blank. And then a subject. Whatever you want it to be. My subject. Subject, yep. And then you come here to your message. Whatever your message is going to be. Hello, world. And then you come, do you want to be able to edit this email? Once again, do you want the user to see it or not? I'm going to say true, let's say. Okay. And that is it. Your command is ready. We'll save this and let's test it out. What happens? It generates the email. Okay, that's beautiful. Now, what just happened there? I closed the email. I did not send it. Well, you're going to get this error because Access is going to detect that the email wasn't sent, but rather the user canceled the email. And it's going to trap that or flag it, should I say, as you can see, a 2005-01 error. Action was canceled. So we're going to say that's fine. We're going to end it. And this is why error trapping, error handling is so important. So let's add in our error handler that we've seen in a previous video. And this, if we run it right now, let's do that. We're going to repeat the exact same scenario, same steps. We're going to open up the email. We're going to cancel it. What happens? Well, my error handler is getting it. And it's displaying more information than previously, but I don't want to see this if the user cancels it, possibly. It's all right if the user chooses to cancel. They may see the email and say, oh no, I pressed the button by mistake, or I need to make some changes in the database first. So they may cancel out. So we don't necessarily want to display an error message every single time the person just closes the email. That's their choice. And if that's the case, then we have to do what's called error trapping. And what we're going to do is we're going to trap that error number specifically, okay, 2501, then, and if, and let's indent this properly. So what would this be doing right now? We're saying if there's this specific error, then show this message box. Wait a second, that's not what we want. We want the actual opposite. We only want to see a message box if this isn't the number. So what we want is actually different than 2501. And the resume error handler, we don't actually normally keep in the if or the case statement that we'd put here. We'd keep it outside. It depends on the scenario, but most times that's how you'd write it. So what's going to happen in the case of an error? It's going to come here and it's going to see if it's error 2501, oh, wait a second, this doesn't apply. So it's just going to come here, jump over it and move on. We're never going to see the error message. But for every other error, we will get the message. And that's what we want. And if we run it now, you'll see we get the message, we close the email, and we don't get any error messages anymore. So this is a properly set up case if we don't want to display errors when the user selects to close it. Okay, so that being said, let's look at sending the object, but actually including an object this time. So we took the first case, which is a plain email. So let's look at the next scenario. So the next scenario would be, let's retake our original line. Okay, so we're going to delete our arguments for a second. You're going to come here. The first thing is, what type of object are we sending? So let's say we're sending a report again. And then it's going to ask us for the name. We're going to get that in 2 seconds. And then it's going to ask us for the format. So for the name, the easiest thing to do is come back in here on your nav pane, find what you're wanting to send them, press F2 and copy it. It's the best way to avoid making any typing errors. Then you go back into VBA, you come here and you just paste it. Now, the format is a different thing. The format, if you know it off by heart, that's great. But for the case where you don't know it off by heart, double-click on SendObject and press F1. This will bring up the support page for that command. And if we look here, output format, it lists here which formats we're allowed to use. Okay, so we could be sending as Excel, we could send as HTML. We're going to go for PDF. So we'll copy that value, and we will now put it here as the format. And then we have the same variables as before, the to CC, BCC subject. So I'm just going to copy what we previously did just to simplify our lives. So now we have a properly set up command to send an email of this report as a PDF. So let's see what it does. We run it. Same pop-up as before because it has to convert it to a PDF. And then it generates the email, no problem. And if you open it up, you have a PDF. There's no issue there. So everything's good there. And we close it out and we don't get an error because we error trap that error. And that pretty much sums up how to use the do command send object method. Okay? But remember, this is access only. So next on our list, if we come back to our article, we don't need this anymore. Let's close it. The next one on our list would be Outlook Automation. So what is Outlook Automation? Outlook Automation is exactly what it says. We're going to use VBA to automate Outlook so we don't have to do things manually. So normally you'd have to launch Outlook. You'd have to then say, create a new email, and then you'd have to populate the subject line. Well, we're going to do all of that through VBA. So that's how we can do it seamlessly so the user doesn't have to do anything. And then we have the choice, just like we did with SendObject, we have the choice whether we want it to pop up so the user can work with it, or if we want to just send it and they don't have to do anything. Let's look at the pros and cons quickly. Well, the pros right off the bat, anyone that knows Outlook, you can send HTML content. You can send multiple attachments. And the attachments don't have to be in a database. They can be anywhere you want on your computer, on your server, your network. Obviously, these emails you're sending through Outlook get logged in the sent items, so you have your history. And it works in any application, so it makes it very flexible. What are the cons? Well, as the name says, you have to have Outlook. So you have to have that installed on every user's computer. There's more coding involved, so slightly more complex. And if you do want to include a database object, if we're talking about access, then things are a little bit more complicated because you have to first export that object in some shape or form to your file system onto your computer on the hard drive, either a PDF as an Excel file, whatever the case may be. You have to first create that file before you can attach it to the email. So let's take a look at how this works. Well, first things first, as it says, you need to have a function. Well, you're in luck. I'm going to supply you with a reliable function here. If you use the link, you're going to end up on my webpage about sending emails. And if you scroll down a little bit, we don't need to worry about all the technical details at this point. You can read it if you want to, but we just scroll down. I have it all wrapped up in a bow here. Here's a function that will do exactly that. Okay, we're going to go over it. And in the header, I have several usage examples on how it can be utilized. And for a more complex version, I have a concrete, extensive example here. This is for being able to embed images within the email itself. We'll get to that in just a minute. So the first thing we want to do we need to copy this function. We need it in the database or in Excel or whatever the case may be. So we make a copy. We come in here. We create a new module. We're going to do as usual. We're going to insert a header so we have a proper header. And then we're going to come here and insert our code. Good practice. Save it. We're going to give it a name that means something. And we should always make sure everything compiles properly. Okay, so at first glance, everything's good. If we look at the input arguments, they're not in the same order, but they're similar to SendObject. You have your two, you have a subject and a body, and you have here the choice whether you want the user to be able to edit it or you want it to just go silently without any user interaction. Then, optionally, you have choices of CC, BCC, you have attachments, accounts, whether you want to embed any images, and whether you want to have a read receipt or not for that email. So let's copy the name of the function. Let's come back to our testing, and let's come here and start off our call. So we're going to call that function and open our bracket, and the first thing it's asking us is, to who? Well, let's simplify our life. Let's copy this guy here. That's who I want to send it to. Next, the subject. Okay, well, I'm going to copy my subject and just simplify our life. After that, it's the body and the edit. So let's just copy all of those values since they're all the same. Close our bracket. And let's see what this gives us. So if we run it as it is right now, it's going to open it up and generate our email with our our subject, and our message. We don't have any attachments yet. We haven't done that. But as you can see, we've now replicated the functionality from SendObject very easily. Okay? You'll also notice, if we look here, we have our signature with the Outlook automation. If we compare that back to the SendObject, right? Let's run SendObject. We don't have our signature. So that too can be a noticeable difference. Okay, so back to this. Let's comment this out again. Let's copy this guy. And let's do a next scenario. We want to add an attachment. No problem. So we remove our bracket. What's the next thing? CC, BCC. Okay, attachments. How does it work? If we look at the Outlook and you look at my header here, it's all explained. It says attachments is an array of attachments. Complete file path with file name and extension. And if you look at some of these examples, I show you how you can do it, either using the array or using split. Whatever you prefer, the choice is yours. So if we come here, let's do that. So I'm going to use array. And then we need to do in quotes and then separated by commas, and we build up our listing. So I know it's going to be C, users, Daniel, desktop, and then I have image01.jpg, and to simplify our life, I know I have image2 PNG, and then I believe I called it sample.txt. So let's run this and see if I'm right about my names. And there are my 3 attachments added. And some people may be wondering, well, what about if I want to do a single attachment? So comment this one out. Well, for a single attachment, the way I do it normally is I just delete them. So no commas, no extra. So I just have a single value in the array. And if I run it, I get my attachment. Okay. let's look at a more complex case. Let's look, if we come back to the function, let's look at the most extreme case. The most extreme case, which is I want to actually have images within my email itself to my user. Well, that's really not very hard. And to save a bit of time, I'm going to copy the example from my website. So let's come here and copy this. So copy the content. Let's go put it in our VBA. And then what we need to do, obviously, is we need to adjust our attachments. And I'm going to explain this in just a second. So don't worry about it. I know it looks a little funky, but I'm going to explain to you how this works in 2 seconds. And this one would be a normal standard attachment. Okay, so we'll handle that one separately in a second. What we're doing, and we still have to make an adjustment, but what we're doing is this. We're going to build up an SHTML, so a string HTML, that's what we're passing to our email is the body of the email. Okay, so we're going to build up our string and pass it. And to build up our string, to embed images in it, we have to attach each image first. We have to give it a unique ID. Okay, so you'll see each image will have a different ID. And it can be anything you want, just as long as they're unique. And then once they've been input into the system, then you can use the ID when you're inserting the image. So you'll see here, capture, capture. Screenshot will be down here at screenshot, okay? And so that's why we're going to have the IDs in our HTML. And we also supply here an array with our images and their unique IDs. So that's why we have a 2-dimensional array, because we need the first dimension to house the file and the second to have its associated ID. Okay, that being said, in our case, our example, what we're doing today, we have 2 images. This right now is set up for 3 because it's always the number -1 because it's 0 based. So you have 0, 1, 2. So that would be 3 images. In our case, we don't have 3, we have 2. So we have 0 and 1. So we want 1, 1 in our case. And then what we can do here is we can delete the third one. We don't have a third one in our instance. As I said, these can be named anything you want. Image 1, let's say. Image 2, let's say. Then I build up my HTML. Well, right now it's built up with 3 images. So I'm going to delete one of them. We don't need it today. And we have to make these IDs match up. So CID, colon, and it has to be the name of your image that you want to put there. So there we go. And they don't have to be in order. You can insert the images in the array in any order and use them in a different order in the HTML. That doesn't make a difference. All that matters is the ID here matches the ID of where you're inserting that image. Once that's done, it's the exact same thing as before. We build up our call, someone, subject, the content, which is what we've built up here in HTML. Do you want to edit it? Yes or no? And then we're not supplying the CC, BCC, all of that stuff. We have to add the images that we built the array. That's critical for this to work. And then lastly, I've included also the option to include a read receipt. So let's see what this gives. Let's run it. And there you go. Here's my email. My 2 images are there. I have my signature. And if you look in the options, the read receipt has been checked off. So that worked beautifully. So let's cancel out. No. Now let's look at adding to that. Let's take this exact same example and let's take it to the next level. And let's take the example of adding an attachment. And let's add an attachment, which we use our array with the file name, and let's test it out. And now you've got embedded images with attachments. How cool is that? Now, another common question, as I had mentioned earlier, is what if we want to attach an existing object from Access specifically? How can we use this function and also attach whether an external file and, let's say, a report from Access? Okay. It actually isn't that hard once you know how it works. Now, I'm going to bring you to my website again, to a specific page which is a little bit more involved, but it illustrates the technique nonetheless. This one here is how can I print individual PDFs, so for each, let's say, client and things like that. And if you look at it, if we just look at the block of code that we're interested in here, how does it work? We build up a file name to give the external PDF, so you control the file name. And then we open the report, we output it as a PDF, and then we close the report. And that's how we're going to do the exact same thing, because we have to first save the report externally to Access, so we have to save it on the hard drive, and then we can link it as we would with any other file. So how do we do that in a real life example? So let's come down here. We'll do sub access object to Outlook. Okay. So to save a bit of time, let's take a look at the code block we need from that article. So copy paste. And here I've put in the report name. So I'm using the same report name that we used up here, the contact list. Okay. And as I said, so here I'm setting up what folder am I saving the generated PDF to. So in this case, I'm going to send it to the same place that my database is located. You can put it elsewhere. And then I build up the file name. So the file name is going to be the folder. And then I'm going to use the report name, so contact list. I put an underscore for my preference. And then I'm going to put the output year, month, day, and then the time. And I put the extension of PDF. Then I open the report, hidden, so the user doesn't see it. I generate the PDF. I export it as a PDF to the file that we told it. And then I close it. So we've done the first part. So we've generated the PDF. The next part is exactly what was previously done. We're going to take this, put it here. So we're going to use our email, and we're going to use an array. And so the first one we're going to use as an image. That's fine. And the second one, we just simplify our life. We use the S file because it's going to be that path with that file name. And if we run it, we now have our image and our PDF. And if we really wanted to take things to the next level, throw everything together, we can come here, copy some of this. Okay, so now we have our embedded images, and we can include our embedded images, and test it out. We need to also change the HTML. It's no longer hello world. We want the HTML that we built up with the images. Now we're ready to test it. And now we have our two attachments, like I said before, our image and our PDF. And we also have embedded images in the email itself. So that pretty much sums up automating Outlook. As I've shown you, you can output Access objects if you're in Access. You can include attachments, as many as you want. You can now embed images directly into the body of the email. So you've got the full power of Outlook at your disposition through VBA. I hope this helps a few of you out there and clarifies. But as I explained, and what's explained also in my webpage, everything is because of this function. So this is the heart of the matter. you need to copy this into a standard module, and then you can do anything you want. Next, if we come back to the first page, we're going to talk about Thunderbird. Now, what is Thunderbird? For people that aren't aware of it, it's an alternative to Outlook. So people that don't have Office or just don't want to use Outlook, Thunderbird is an exceptional option for them. I have several clients using it reliably, and yeah, they're very happy with it. In a similar fashion to Outlook, we can automate it. However, Outlook is part of Office, so Microsoft has made sure to expose to us through VBA libraries everything, pretty much, all the functions, methods, properties. We can do almost anything. Thunderbird is more reserved. We can't access it in a conventional sense through VBA, but they've given us command line capabilities, and that's what I automate through my function. So let's just look at my raw code. And if we look here, I've created a function that we're going to examine in a second. But there is one limitation with Thunderbird. Thunderbird, unlike Outlook, you can create the email no problem. That's easy. Sending it automatically isn't. There is a workaround, and I provide it. If you just go a little lower, I show you one way of managing to automate it, and it relies on using send keys. This line here. I'm not a proponent of send keys, but this is actually, I think, the first time in 20 years of development that I've ended up using it in a production scenario, and it has worked for my client at least. Okay. Let's come back up here. Let's work with this. Let's copy it. Okay. We come into Access in this case, but it could be Excel. It really doesn't make a difference. We insert a standard module, and I'm gonna always insert my module header, and then below it I put my function. Now, what is this function doing? Oh, yes. Let's give it a name that makes sense. Well, if we look at the input arguments, they're always very similar, right? It's an email. So we have our our subject, and our body, CC, BCC, attachments, and what account we want to send it from. If you notice, everything is optional. There is no single input argument that is required. So what this means is that we can actually run it without giving anything, and it will just pop open a blank email. I did this because it was actually a request on a forum. Next, how does this all work? Well, it actually works very simply. As I said, Thunderbird exposes the ability to run it through the command line. So what we're doing, in fact, is we're building up a command variable, a string. And it starts off by going Thunderbird compose, start an email, compose an email. And then depending on what you've supplied, if you've given us a 2, it adds a 2. If you've given us subject, it adds a subject. But everything is optional. And it just goes through this. It iterates over attachments if you've given us multiple, and the account, and it just builds up this string. And then at the very end, we run the string. And that's what tells Thunderbird, okay, do this. Compose this message with this in it. So it's very easy. If you look in the header, I give a usage section with multiple examples. So let's start off with the simplest one. So if we come here, we come to our testing. Okay, we're going to come down now for Thunderbird, and we just put in, we call the function with no input arguments. As I said, if we run it, you're simply going to get a blank email. That's it. Okay, let's comment that one out. Let's go to a more advanced example. Still basic, but now we're going to supply it with the 2, the subject, and the email content, the email message itself. And see, I'm using HTML. I'm using bold, for instance. And if we run it, it's going to open up an email, my 2, my subject, and my body, which has been bolded. Okay? And we close it. Let's try something a little bit more advanced. Let's try including attachments. So we'll copy the example. We'll put it here, except we're going to use our attachments for this computer. Okay, and we're going to run it. And there we go. Same email, but now we have 1, 2, 3 attachments. And we cancel out of it. So let's go down and find our example where we're sending an access object. This is access specific right now. Let's come here, and now we're going to do access object to Thunderbird. Okay, come back up. We know this works with attachments, so let's just copy that line. We're happy with it. Okay, and now we're going to add the S file. Remember, if you don't, we built up a file name here, and we generated a PDF from our report to that file name on the hard drive. So that's why here I'm adding that file now that we just generated. So if we run this now, it's going to export our 3 attachments plus a 4th one, which is the contact list from the database. Okay. So that pretty much covers everything you need to know for using the Thunderbird automation. It's very similar in nature to the Outlook automation. And with the function on my website that I supply, it's really straightforward to use. And with this video too, I think I've illustrated most use case scenarios. So I hope this helps you guys out. The last thing I wanted to go over with you guys, if we come back to the first page, I wanted to go over CDO Mail, which is another very common approach for sending emails. It's been around for a long time as well. What is CDO Mail? Well, CDO Mail connects directly to your email server. So it's bypassing email clients. So you don't need Outlook. You don't need Thunderbird or any other email client. It is going to talk directly with your email server. What does this mean? Pros and cons. Well, obviously, like Outlook, like Thunderbird, it supports HTML. There's no problem there. You can do multiple attachments. You can do external attachments. Like I said, it doesn't require any software, any program to be installed on the user's computer. And it works in any other VBA application. So you can use an Excel, Word, PowerPoint. Doesn't make a difference. It works. Cons. Okay, it is a little bit more complex. And like Thunderbird, like Outlook, if you want to include, if we're talking access, you want to include database objects, a little bit more complicated. You have to export them first. It also means that somehow you have to be able to provide the server credentials, your email account credentials. So you have to have the server name, the port, the username, the password, etc. And because we're going through the server and not an application like Outlook or Thunderbird, it's not being logged. Okay, so it's not going to be saved in any sent item list anywhere. So if you want visibility on CDO Mail, you have to make sure you're doing the visibility, either through your VBA function as it processes it. You log it to a table, you make an entry in a row in Excel, whatever the case may be. Or what I do with a lot of my clients actually is I put them in BCC. So when the email goes out, they also get a copy. So it confirms that the email went out correctly. And they just create a simple rule in Outlook, for instance, that whenever it gets a BCC from this sender, this account, with a certain title, that it automatically puts it in their sent items for them or in a specific folder. Okay, enough talk. Let's look at the code behind CDO Mail. Well, CDO Mail is pretty straightforward. And I have a sample code here for you. I'm going to step back for a second here. If you go to the bottom of this article, I also have a demo that has it. And the difference you're going to see, the main difference is the demo, it gets its credentials through a table. So it enables you, let's say, to deploy a database to users and the users specify the account information. So it's in a table, they have full control. It can be beneficial in some scenarios to do that. In other scenarios, you're going to prefer to have the code like this, where it's hard-coded. You put in the password, you put in the user account, it's hard-coded in your VBA. You can obfuscate, obviously, sensitive information if you want, encryption, things like that. That's up to you, but ultimately it would be hard-coded. So let's take a look at this. Let's try this guy out. We're going to copy it. We're going to come in here. We're going to create a new standard module, give it a name that means something. And per the usual, I'm going to just put a module header. And below it, I paste my function. Okay, so there's a small typo here. Let's fix that. How does it work? Well, quite simply, this is a very simple function. You see the input arguments, similar to every other case we've done today, to subject, body, BCC, and attachments. The top section here is configuration. So this is where, like I said, you're going to give it your mail server, your username, your password, things like that. And below is where it's going to then generate and create the email, put the subject line, etc., etc., etc. One thing you'll notice here, there's the option to have a from, the from. Typically, the from should match your username. Typically. In all the cases I've ever done, that's what you want. Because if they don't match up, then you might get flagged as possibly being a spammer. So just be careful with that. I've kept them separate, but in reality, 99% of the time, they should be the same. So how do we use it? Well, like every other case, we're going to take a copy of the name. We're going to come to our testing. We'll go up to the top. And we're going to simply call our function. And we have to subject body. So let's just do that. To subject body. Put it there. Close our bracket. Let's send it. Let's send it to my email. So we're going to send it. It's going to go off. And if I, for instance, open Outlook, or here, we use Thunderbird. It's at the top. We open Thunderbird, and there it is. But like I said, it's not in any sent items anywhere because it went through the server directly. So this is why it becomes very important, like I said, to include yourself in the BCC. Wouldn't be a very good example. I'm sending it to myself, but you understand the principle. Okay? Include yourself in BCC, then you're going to receive a copy of the email as well. Besides the BCC, we also have the attachment, like we always do. So if we come here and we take our attachments and we put them here and we send it off, and we come back to Thunderbird. There it is. And I have the attachments. Okay? And those aren't actually in line, even though they look like they're in line. They aren't. It's just the way Thunderbird operates with images. It gives you a preview. And the last scenario that we can obviously do, we can take this and send an access object to CDO, for instance. We come back up to the top, copy the line that we know works, delete that, paste the line that we know works, and we can now add the S file for our PDF that we generate earlier in the code, remember? open the report, put it out as a PDF, close the report. And then we use that PDF, the file, in our attachments. Everything's good. We can run this. It generated the PDF. It sent the email already. If we come here, we do a get. There it is. And now we have 4 attachments. So we have the 2 images that always previews. But if you see here, we've got the PDF. We also have that text file. I don't know if you also noticed, in general, CDO is quite rapid. So that can also be beneficial. That wraps up CDO pretty much. And then let's wrap this discussion up. Let's conclude this discussion today, this video, on the other techniques. So I present here multiple other techniques for you to explore if you so choose. Some of them are very good. Actually, none of them are bad. Just note that getting into WinSock APIs is not for the faint of heart. You have to be a very experienced developer to even contemplate getting into that. But it gives you complete access over everything. And you can bypass using a client completely and things like that. You're interacting directly with the server again. But this is not for the faint of heart, because you don't want to mess up the security protocols and things like that to ensure that when you're communicating and sending emails that you're doing so in an encrypted manner and things like that. But I've given you the link and some information should you ever want to go down that avenue and dabble a little bit. I hope this has been informative. I hope this helps a few of you out there. As usual, really any support you can give would go a long way to help me. Like, subscribe, share with your friends and coworkers and your online networks. And leave me a comment, guys. I'd love to know what I can do to improve these videos, what subjects perhaps you'd like covered in future videos. And we'll see you in the next video, guys. Take care and have a great day.